Hello. In a previous video on probability sampling techniques, a key point was made that in this type of sampling, every single member of the population stands a chance of being a sample member. In non-probability sampling, this is not the case. Not every member of the population stands a chance of being a sample member. This is because the researchers adopting non-probability sampling techniques do not seek to make generalizations about the population based on a randomly selected representative sample. Rather, the purpose of these researchers adopting non-probability sampling techniques is to gain deep insights or to explore specific trends and specific behaviors, for example, specific characteristics. Generalizability is not a concern for them. This is the reason why non-probability sampling is adopted in case studies, exploratory research, and qualitative research. And now with the types of non-probability sampling techniques. The first type is referred to as convenience sampling. As the term implies, in convenience sampling, the researcher selects the members or the individuals who are readily available or easy to access. This is the case, for example, if a doctoral student who decides to collect his or her data from the classes he teaches as a part-timer at a given higher education institution. Or, for example, when a researcher decides to conduct a study on the motivation, for instance, of high school students, then he or she can decide to collect data from the nearby high school or from the high school where he knows maybe some teachers who can offer some help, who can encourage students, for example, to participate. The second non-probability sampling technique to cover is judgmental or purposive sampling. It's called judgmental because the researcher bases his judgment on who would provide the most relevant information. And it is called purposive because this segment chosen suits the purposes of his or her study. No random selection is made in this regard. A good example is of a doctoral student conducting his research or her research on vocabulary learning strategies among high proficiency students. One way of doing this is to random select and assign a placement test and decide who is proficient and who is not, and then conduct the study. In judgmental and purposive sampling, the student targets directly, for example, a group of doctoral students or master students on the assumption that these are more proficient. And of course, they conduct research on them because they think that they will serve their objectives better and quicker. The third type of non-probability sampling is known as quota sampling. In quota sampling, the researcher divides the population into specific groups based maybe on demographics like age, gender, educational level, etc. And a non-random sampling procedure follows. And a non-random sample is taken to meet a predetermined quota. This is reminiscent of the sampling technique in probability sampling known as stratified sampling. The key difference here is that in stratified sampling, after we have subdivided the group on demographic criteria, we select the candidates in a random fashion. A good example of quota sampling is when, for example, a doctoral student decides to work on undergraduate students' written production, for example. So he or she can divide these students into groups S1, S3, S5, or S2, S4, S6, maybe 3 groups. And then instead of randomizing within each group, he or she comes and takes the first 60 respondents because, for example, they need 60 respondents from each group. So this is quota sampling. So when I reach 60 from group 1, I move to group 2, and I do the same, and I move to group 3, and I do the same. No randomization is involved in quota sampling. The last non-random sampling technique we can mention here is the famous snowball sampling technique. Here, the researcher decides, for example, to recruit 10 participants, for example, who will in turn invite other participants. If there are students, for example, each of these 10 students will ask 3 or 4 or 5 classmates or the people they know, their acquaintances, to take part in the study. When this operation repeats, the process will have a snowball effect. The researcher starts with 10 students, and after a few days, he or she obtains maybe 100 participants. Thank you very much.